inspired man to write down this story so that it might be preserved for all ages, the relationship between God and God's people, and this incredible love affair that God initiated and has continued to sustain even in our moments of rejection and our sinfulness and our disobedience. How God still seeks to woo man and woman back to himself. God's children, God's creation. To place man and woman as the lords of this creation. That's basically what the Bible is. It's a love story. It's an accounting. And there are some historical facts, of course, in the book. But if we try to use the Bible to validate certain things in history, we're going to be sadly disappointed. And if we take every word literally that's in this book, we're going to find some contradictions that would be very disturbing. That's why we have to rely on biblical scholars who study this word to guide us in a way that we can understand what is being revealed in this word. So we call that inspiration. I'm going to take some questions at the end. Hold those questions. Don't forget them. So that not only does the official church, and I said, what was the official church back then 2,000 years ago? It was the Catholic Church, what became known as the Roman Catholic Church. It was the Roman Catholic Church that approved which one of these books would be in this book that we call the Bible. Hello, that's history. It was the Roman Catholic Church that decided the books that would be in this. It didn't drop down from Mount Sinai. It wasn't sent by FedEx, UPS, or United States Parcel Service. Of course, they weren't even around then. But just a little humor to say that God just didn't decide to go tell man to go to a cave like the Qumran scrolls that were found, in the Middle East, composed of, it seems, by an early Essene community led by John the Baptist. No, they weren't found in a cave. Man, God inspired man through the course of history to relate these human events in which God intervened. Because if you look at the Bible, if you want to talk about any kind of a historical context, it's looking at the Word of God in the form of God intervening in the affairs of man in various situations and circumstances, and God proving that God is God, that God is an ever-present, omniscient God, okay? So when you look at these books, it begins with God creating. The book of Genesis begins with God creating the world, creating the universe, and topping or crowning that creation with the making, the forming of man and woman in the divine image and likeness of God. But that divine image and likeness what is that image and likeness? It is not physical, it is spiritual. Because we read in John chapter 4, verse 24, that God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. So we know that. But and we read that in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, where God says, let us make man in our own image and after our likeness. So in that context, it is in the realm of spirit, not flesh. So that everything that we want to know about man and woman's essence has to focus on the spirit, not the flesh. If we believe that God is alive, if we believe that God is omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, omnipresent, or ubiquitous, which means that God can be anywhere and everywhere at the same time, then we know that the fullness and the totality of life resides in God, which is also spirit rather than in mortal flesh. Life has to consist, or human life has to consist of the presence of the eternal spirit within each and every one of us. Because once that spirit departs, once it exits, expires, once the breath goes out, it's a wrap. The body no longer can sustain itself. So it's the spirit, it's the wind, the breath that sustains life. That's why I love that passage from Ezekiel chapter 37, the valley of dry bones. If you've never read that or not familiar with it, you must read it before the sun sets. That's awesome. When the breath is out, the body is dead. And even though bodies are brought back to life, sinew, skin, and flesh, and no breath is in them, they're still dead. It's only when the spirit enters into those bodies that they rose up like a mighty army. So the whole concept here is that when God makes man and woman in God's image and likeness, it is in the form of spirit. So all of the properties that are contained in God as spirit are also inherently present in us, which means that if God is eternal, then that which makes us live, move, and have our being is eternal. It cannot die. It has no beginning. It has no end. There's a supernatural quality to the natural. The natural becomes supernatural when God breathes life into it. God steps into nature and creates man and woman out of the dust, out of the dirt, out of the clay of the earth, and then breathed into its nostrils the breath of life. And man became a living soul, a living being. Woo! If that ought not to encourage you today, I don't know what will. Just to know that I live, move, and have my being because of the presence of God dwelling in me. And that if God is in you, you have all power. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. We're going to talk about that, Christ. So the point here is that so man becomes a corporeal being, although that which is corporeal, fleshly, is limited and subject to decomposition and decay. But that's not life. This is the container of life. When I buy a carton of milk, I'm not concerned so much about the carton, even though it may attract me to purchase that particular brand of milk, but I'm concerned about what's on the inside. Because it can look pretty on the outside and be rotten on the inside. People are like that too, you know. She's a lovely house, but nobody's at home. He's a handsome guy, but ain't got no brains. Got a brain built by Mattel. So the whole concept here is that, okay, God creates us, and then God uses us in substantial form to be the body, the visible expression or manifestation of God on earth. Our real calling in life as spiritual beings practicing to be human, not human beings attempting to become spiritual, is that we manifest the presence of God on earth in a visible, tangible way. That our lives are not our own. We do not live for ourselves. No one lives for oneself. No one dies for oneself. While we live, we are responsible to the Lord, and when we die as his servants. Paul says that in his letter to the Romans. So the concept here is that when we discover that our lives do not belong to us, but God is dwelling in us and working in and through us, we can accomplish the impossible, the incredible. That we can call forth things that be not as though they were. We can speak things into existence. Because that's what God does. Why would we deny our own potential? Why would we deny our potential when it is God working in and through us in the first place? How can we limit God? And because we don't know who we are, we don't know our real identity, we are constantly putting limitations on God when God is trying to break free. We need to loose him and let him go free. We need to loose God. We trying to, God is in us, and God is saying, I'm using you as my instrument, as my ambassador, as my vessel. But you don't seem to be getting with it. I love this passage. I want you to go to a passage in the Bible that explains what I'm saying in a very concrete way, because we need to get a sense of who we are.